undergoing or managing. This is the inevitable alternative a company has to face in the dynamics of international commerce. What I've found repeatedly in my more than 20 years professional career as an international lawyer in the company I represented is an expected attitude in addressing the issue of the international transaction, leaving the outcome substantially to chance. Even in some large companies, often, to say the least, I found a suboptimal approach related to what are their main sources of wealth, the international markets. Maybe because the matter appears manageable with a certain amount of empiricism and practices, or maybe because the early involvement of a professional and reputable one in this field is often seen as a cost, not an investment. Nonetheless, for whatever the reasons, the approach very often is that of a blindfolded man. Let me just give you a blatant example based on some recent experience. A very renowned Italian multinational company in the food sector has entered a distributorship agreement for the Belgian territory on an exclusive basis. The parties have agreed to the Belgian law as the governing law of the contract. Unfortunately, it did not bother to evaluate with its legal consultants the consequences of such choice to the overall commercial relationship. So they discovered, but too late, that this law, unlike for example the English law or even the Italian one, which was used to govern the termination phase of the contract, have been applying the agency discipline by analogy to this kind of contract, with the consequence of recognizing the same indemnities to the distributor that the law recognized to the agent. By consequence, also due to the long-standing duration of the contract, the Italian company has had to face a significant cash disbursement. And this was unexpected and not budgeted in the relationship business plan. Moreover, the example is even quite enlightening to this difference between undergoing versus managing approach. What is typical in this negotiation process of the governing law clause is that each party tries to impose its domestic law, which by definition is the law their counsel are familiar with. The quite predictable outcome of this ballet is that when we have a dominance of one company on the other, we shall have a contractual applicable law of this party. But in the more recurrent scenario, in the absence of this dominance, the parties try to reach a compromise by choosing a third country law. This law is usually the law which the parties ignore everything of. One of the recurrent peak is indeed the Swiss law, which is supposedly a neutral law. But there is no such law. The Swiss discipline, indeed, under the Federal Code of Obligation, after an initial phase in which the distribution contract was considered by the federal jurisprudence as a distinct contract from the agency contract, not recognizing to the distributor any final indemnities, has evolved over the time. More recently, the Swiss Federal Court has assimilated the distribution relationship with the agency, awarding the distributor under certain circumstances a certain right of compensation at the end of the relationship. Are particular cases, but it's something that needs to be considered. Then it's always a matter of choice, being aware of the complexities around us and try to move on to the management phase of these complexities, or hope for the best and cursing the unhappy outcome.